Good morning. I'm Debbie Hartung, the author of The Factory of Maladies 7 Days on a San Francisco Psych Ward. And I'm so happy to be here talking to you today. And I'd love to thank Boulder Books for this wonderful opportunity. And like you, I'm a lover of independent bookstores. I have been my entire life. And I just really encourage you to shop local whenever possible. Thanks again to Boulder Books.
Thank you. Can you give us a very brief synopsis of your book?
So my memoir takes place on a San Francisco psych ward. 9 years ago, I awoke on a psychiatric unit and I couldn't remember how I arrived there. And my memoir chronicles the week of my life I spent institutionalized, and it also unravels the mystery of what led up to my institutionalization, a failed suicide attempt, and it also dives deep into family dynamics, the danger of cults, and the healing power of creativity.
Great. And what inspired you to write this book?
There are so many factors that inspired me to write and share my story. But first and foremost, I wrote for my own healing. And the inspiration for my book actually happened on the psych ward. There was a very kind nurse who sort of took me under her wing. She could see how traumatized I was. And in my chart, there was this little tiny bit of information that said that I was a writer and an artist. And one night I was trying to go to sleep, which was very challenging, as you can imagine, on a psych ward. And I felt a strange presence, and I looked up, and she was standing in front of me, and she had a notebook and a miniature golf pencil, and she handed this to me and said, "Write." And then she kind of scurried out of my room quickly, and I knew that she was breaking protocol because it's forbidden to have any sharp objects, especially a pencil, in one's room while you're institutionalized. So that really spoke to me, even through the fog of my memory. And also, when I was released from the psychiatric ward, I was recovering from a serious brain injury that resulted during my suicide attempt. And it was creativity combined with proper medication that really helped heal a lot of my neurological problems. And the more I noticed that the more I wrote, and it was just a stream of consciousness journal at the time, the better I felt, the less my PTSD symptoms were. And I really just felt that putting my pain to paper was the ultimate catharsis.
Well, thank you. That's very powerful. Did you find it a difficult or a healing experience to revisit your time in a psych ward?
Actually, I felt that it was difficult and healing simultaneously. So the difficulty I, just shared about, it was incredibly triggering emotionally and even physically because my PTSD symptoms were so intense. I would get panic attacks whenever I wrote in the beginning. And yet, as I mentioned before, it turned out to be so healing, and it actually inspired my writing because that stream of consciousness, I just channeled all of these intense emotions and memories that haunted me. So yes, it was very difficult, and yet it did prove to be one of the most healing things that I've ever done for myself.
And why did you feel that this is an important story to tell?
So I feel that this is an important story to tell, and it is like many other stories that are equally important because at the root of it, it's a story of hope. Although my memoir may seem bleak in the beginning and slightly confusing and I'm clearly disoriented, I do recover, and I was able to write and share my journey and my pain and also my healing. And I feel that if I was able to write a memoir while overcoming a suicide attempt a brain injury and extricating myself from a new age cult, that shows an, that I overcame adversity. And if I can do it, I know that others can as well.
Thank you. What's one aspect of our current mental health system that you feel particularly falls short of what we need?
So there's quite a few aspects that I feel need a complete revamp and major improvements. And first and foremost, I think that patients really deserve to be treated with the same amount of compassion, dignity, and kindness as you would treat someone with, let's say, a broken leg. Um, I did notice that while I was on the psychiatric unit, I almost felt as if I was a criminal at times because of my treatment. And I know from speaking with my fellow patients that they've also experienced this. And many of the doctors, nurses, occupational staff members that I came across had really good intentions, but they were undertrained, they were overworked, they were exhausted, and they had no idea how to deal with individuals in an emotional crisis. So I would also advocate for intense training, increased funding, and just a general increased degree of respect, which I think all patients deserve, no matter what their diagnosis.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want us to know about your book?
I'd like you to know that although it deals with heavy subject matter, that it is told with compassion, and there's also dark humor, which may seem hard to believe, but I really do feel like that is the silver lining in my story, is that humor and the ability to laugh even in a situation so scary and a little absurd.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, what are a couple of books that you've read recently that you really loved and have inspired you?
I have to say, pardon my reach, Sea of Poppies by Amitav Ghosh is one of my all-time favorite books, and I just reread it. It's so amazing. The writing is beautiful, and from a historical standpoint, is fascinating. So I always encourage people to read this wonderful book, and it is part of the Ibis trilogy, and it's the first book in the trilogy, and it happens to be my favorite. And the other book that I just read is Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart, who's the author of Shuggie Bain. And although I love Shuggie Bain, there is something about Young Mungo that really spoke to me. The writing is gorgeous. The story is really intense and beautiful. And there's a lot of challenges for James and Mungo in 1980s Scotland and Glasgow. So I won't ruin it and tell you anymore, but I highly recommend these books.
Thank you. Okay, well, can you read a short passage from your book?
Sure. So I actually have a few passages. They're very short, so I'll just I'll start in the beginning. After an interminable wait for morning, the doors began to quickly open and slam. I heard the distinct sound of the mentally ill shuffling down the hallway. No destination in mind, just wandering aimlessly in green slipper socks. Each day bled into the next without any distinction or differentiation. Complete and utter timelessness. My body throbbed and ached as I slowly got out of bed. As I closed the door to my room, I was startled by the sound of rain pelting down on the window. Splat, splat. The wind screamed like a banshee from an ancient Gaelic tale as I made my way to the bathroom. I disrobed and let my scrubs fall to the floor. They were stiff with perspiration. I turned on the shower and shuddered as I waited for the water to heat up. Finally, I stepped into the scalding water, hoping it would sanitize me. I let the intense pressure from the faucet pound my neck and shoulders. I couldn't stand the smell of the antibacterial soap I was given, so I used shampoo to wash my body. My back was in constant pain as I bent over with barely enough room to wash my feet. I washed what was left of my hair and turned off the water. I stepped out of the shower into a steam-filled bathroom, the air heavy and wet with humidity. As I brushed my teeth, I was grateful that the condensation saved me from confronting my reflection in the mirror. Thunder rumbled in the distance, followed by a loud clapping sound. Lightning struck just as Dr. Mueller appeared in my room, on cue as if he was a villain in a low-budget horror film. He sat down on Jamie's bed very carefully and narrowly avoided becoming entangled in her dirty sheets, which had been left haphazardly on her bed each morning since her arrival. "Can I go home now?" I fired this question quickly before Dr. Mueller could ask me vague questions about my well-being or lack thereof. Dr. Mueller paused and took a deep breath in through his nose and exhaled through his mouth, which allowed his panis to burst forth from the constraints of his belt and fall over his trouser waistline. He was clearly annoyed by his belly flopping out, but also by my question. He waited until he was good and ready to answer. Finally, he turned his head to look at me. I felt my stomach turn to knots and the hairs on my arms stood on end. "Let me ask you a question. Why are you so desperate to leave?" He had a sadistic smile on his face after he posed this query to me, and I had to admit that it had caught me off guard because it seemed utterly ridiculous and bizarre. Why would I choose to stay in a psychiatric prison when the free world was only a highly secured doorway away? Unfortunately for me, freedom required Dr. Mueller's acquiesce, for California law stated that the psychiatrist who signed you into the hospital was the only one who could sign you out. Dr. Mueller continued to stare at me with a look of expectation, and it was clear that he wanted an answer to his question. The sooner the better. I burst into tears. I could no longer take the stress of this twisted game. He abruptly stood up from Jamie's bed and triumphantly turned on his heels to walk out of the room. As he approached the doorway, I saw him pause slightly, and although I was choked up and still crying, I managed to answer him. I felt like my life depended on it. "It's so drab in here. There's no music or art, and it's freezing. I just want to be home where I'm safe. I'm scared of the other patients. I miss Krishna." I couldn't stop babbling once I started, and I was prepared to go on when Dr. Mueller interrupted me. "What makes your home so safe? According to your file, it's where you tried to take your own life. Also, the police officer who found you noted that you wrote a will and left a rent check for May, implying that you were determined to end your life. This was not a cry for help. You had made the decision to die already. You followed through with a lethal cocktail of Xanax and alcohol. We take these sorts of actions very seriously here." I was instantly stunned into silence and submission. A police officer? A will? What exactly happened? Dr. Mueller interrupted my frantic thoughts as he continued to verbally twist the knife into my already delicate and wounded psyche. "Your home is not safe unless you are. Do you know what I mean by this, Deborah?" I sat there silently for a moment, ignoring his question, and then I shuddered and turned my face away from Dr. Mueller. I wondered which one of us was truly ill. "You are not safe unless you are not a danger to yourself or others. That means taking your medication, talking to a therapist, and basics like feeding yourself, which you have not been able to do, bathing, etc. Does that make sense?" The newfound softness in his voice frightened me, and I sat quietly, waiting for him to continue, as he had made it very clear from the start of this perverted interaction that he was in charge. I nodded my head and turned to look at Dr. Mueller, who had a neutral expression on his face for once. Instantaneously, I decided to try a new tactic. I would agree with him and forego fighting in the hopes that this would soothe his ego and help me on my quest for freedom. Actually, I do know what you mean. I will admit that I was not in my right mind when I first came here. But now that I'm back on my meds and going to occupational therapy, I feel fine. I can take care of myself. Krishna will be home soon. He can help too. Ah, so you admit it. You are not in your right mind. He began scribbling on his yellow pad of paper. Before I could interrupt him and argue that my point was to be taken in the past tense, he had had the last word. I knew that my tactic had backfired and I had inadvertently incriminated myself. However, I did not deserve the severity of his final blow. You know, people have tried to take their own lives on this very ward. In fact, someone killed himself in this very room. So unfortunate. He tutted and urgently walked out of the room, his cheap dress shoes making scuffing sounds down the hallway. Thank you so much for listening and for joining me today. And once again, my new memoir is The Factory of Maladies, available at Boulder Books. And thank you once again, Boulder Books, for hosting me. Thanks. Take care.